Jay-Z and Beyoncé, a love story, written by Barron, narrated by Jessica Ann Bogart. A word before. A word before. If you found this book because you already know them, because you have been listening to one of them, or both of them, since you were a teenager, or because you have been watching them from the back of a Houston church, or the back of a Brooklyn block since you were a child, or because Lemonade landed on you in 2016 the way it landed on a generation of women, or because 444 landed on you in 2017 the way it landed on a generation of men. Welcome. You will find what you came for. The phone calls before the dating are here. Bonnie and Clyde are here. The Tribeca penthouse is here. The white orchids from Thailand are here. The number 4 is here. In every place a 4 belongs. Blue Ivy is here. Rumi is here. Sir is here. The hard years are here, told in the only way they have ever told them, which is in the language of the work each of them put on the public record in their own art and their own words. If you found this book, and you have somehow lived a life on this earth without these 2 voices in it, welcome to you too, and stay. The question this book is answering is one you already care about, whether or not you have ever bought a ticket to a tour or streamed an album. Can 2 of the most watched people on the planet, born 12 years apart, in 2 of the loudest American cities, with 2 of the loudest American childhoods, build a quiet marriage on purpose? Can a hustler from Brooklyn and a homecoming queen from Houston be friends first for a year and a half before either of them goes on a date? Can a marriage survive being the most surveilled marriage on earth? Can 2 artists turn the worst chapter of their marriage into 2 of the most important records ever made, and then turn around and stay married to each other anyway, and parent 3 children together, and grow into the long version? The book you are holding is inspired by publicly available material about Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter and Shawn Carter. The exterior, the timeline, the on-record interviews, the album lyrics, the joint magazine profiles, the joint tours, the public anniversaries, the Vogue essay, the New York Times sit-down, is sourced. The interior, the late-night phone calls in the early 2000s, the rooms in the Tribeca penthouse no camera was in, the morning at 4:44 a.m. when one of them was awake before the other one, the long, quiet hours of the work 2 adults do when they have decided to stay, is dramatized in the spirit of what they have said in their own words, in their own art, about their own marriage. No scandal has been invented. No third party has been named. The miscarriages and the elevator and the year a man was no longer his daughter's manager are treated, where they appear at all, with the softening the master instructions of this series require, and with the dignity these 2 human beings, despite the size of their public, deserve. What follows is a love story, not a perfect one, not a televised one, the actual one told the way they have always told it, friends first, on the phone for a year and a half, with the work to do. Prologue. Both of us. A house. An evening in 2026. If you were a fly on the wall of one specific room in one specific house this couple owns, and there are several houses in several cities on more than one coast, and the fly would have to choose, the right room to land in is the kitchen. It is always the kitchen. It is always the kitchen with these 2, the way it is always the kitchen with most marriages, no matter how many other rooms a marriage has bought. The kitchen is large. The kitchen has been chosen. The kitchen has a window that faces a body of water that depends on which house we are in, and on which evening we are in, and on which decade we are in, and the body of water changes. But the kitchen window does not. There are 3 children somewhere in the house. The eldest is 14. She has by now seen most of what there is to see, in the way of a 14-year-old who has been raised inside the most surveilled marriage of her parents' generation. She does not announce that she has seen it. She is in the room 2 rooms over, on a couch, with a book in her lap and headphones in her ears. The twins are 9. They are 9, and they are loud, in the way 9-year-old twins are loud. They are upstairs. They are doing something we do not need to fully describe. They are doing what 9-year-old twins do. The dog in the kitchen is awake, but unmoved by the upstairs noise, because the dog has been a dog in this house for several years now, and the dog has, by now, calibrated. She is at the counter. He is at the stove. He is not always at the stove in this marriage, and she is not always at the counter in this marriage. But on this particular evening, in this particular kitchen, in this particular year, this is the geometry. He is reading the back of a box, the way he has always read the back of a box, with a teacher's slowness, the slowness he has had since long before he was a husband or a father, the slowness he learned in a Brooklyn block where you were not supposed to be in any kind of rush. She is on her phone. She is also not in any kind of rush. The 2 people in this kitchen, after 26 years of knowing each other and 18 years of being married to each other, have, between them, developed a shared sense of pace that is, by now, audible. He says, "B." She says, He says, "Dinner." She says, "Give me 5." He says, "You said 5 10 minutes ago." She laughs. She puts the phone down. She comes around the counter. She comes up behind him at the stove. She puts her chin on his shoulder. She looks at the box. She says, "We have eaten this exact dinner 40 times this year." He says, "This is 41. She says, "All right." She kisses the back of his neck. She does not say the rest of what she could say. The rest of what she could say is that 26 years ago, she was 18 years old in Houston, and he was 30 years old in Brooklyn, and neither of them had any idea that the other one even existed yet, and that some specific small set of phone calls, beginning on some specific small evening in late 2000, had become, by accident or by grace or by the kind of patient work that an 18-year-old hairstylist daughter and a 30-year-old former hustler from Marcy do not, in their first phone call, know how to predict the marriage they are now standing inside of. The phone call became the friendship. The friendship became the marriage. The marriage became the work. The work became the children. The children became the rest of it. That is the love story. That is the whole of it, in this kitchen, in one sentence, for the people who skip to the end. The rest of the book is how they got here. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Beyoncé. Houston. I was born in Houston, Texas, on September 4th, 1981. The 4th of September, said the long way the women in our family say it. To a couturier and a Xerox executive who, on the day I was born, were already negotiating, in the small interior way that 2 ambitious Texans negotiate, the kind of household I was going to grow up in. My mother is named Tina. My mother is the kind of woman who can make a dress out of a curtain, and the curtain looks like the dress was its first idea. My mother taught me what hands could do. My mother taught me what discipline was. My mother taught me, before I was old enough to have words for it, that being a black woman in Houston in the 1980s was a thing you were going to do beautifully, on purpose, in the face of every reason not to. My father is named Matthew. My father is, in the public record, a complicated man. I am going to keep him mostly off the page in this book, because some of what he has been in the public record is not what I want my children to read first, and a daughter has the right to choose which version of her father appears in which kind of room. What I will tell you about my father in this book is that he was the first man who told me I was going to be more than ordinary. He said it in the kitchen of our house in Houston when I was about 7 years old. He said it with his hand on my chin. He said it because he believed it, and because he had decided that his job, as my father, was to make sure I believed it too. I had a sister. Her name is Solange. She is 5 years younger than me. We shared a bedroom and a bathroom and a particular brand of Houston black girl precision that the rest of the world did not yet have language for. She has since then made her own art and her own life and her own marriage and her own family, and she will keep most of those things off this page because they are not my pages to put down. I will say only this. I love my sister. My sister is the first person who ever told me a thing about myself I did not yet know about myself. I have, in my entire life, had 2 such people. My sister was the first one. The man I am writing this book with was the second. I sang first in church. I sang first at home. I sang first in any room, before I knew what singing was for. I was the kind of small black girl in Houston who did not yet know whether she was going to be a singer. I only knew that I was already singing. By the time I was 8, I was in a girl group with 2 other small girls in Houston. By the time I was 9, I was performing at a talent show. By the time I was 12, I was, for the first time but by no means the last, on a stage that was not big enough for the size of the voice that was already moving through me. I want you to know, for the rest of this book, that I came into love already in motion. I was not a still girl. I was not a girl who was waiting in the way some girls are taught to wait. I was a girl who was already moving toward the next stage, toward the next song, toward the next room. By the time I was old enough to know that there was a next anything. The man I would marry, when he met me, met a moving girl. The man I would marry would have to learn to move with me, or to move at his own pace alongside me, or to be the man he eventually became, which is the man who has, for 26 years, walked in time with the song that was already in me before he ever entered the room. If you take any one image of me into the rest of this book, take that one. The Houston girl, already moving, already singing, already on her way somewhere the rest of the world was about to have to catch up to. She is the one who, 20 years later, would meet a man on the phone and stay on the phone for a year and a half before she went on a single date. Chapter 2. Jay-Z, Marcy. I was born in Brooklyn on December 4th, 1969, to a woman named Gloria Carter and a man named Adnis Reeves, in a hospital that does not need to be named in this book, in a neighborhood that does need to be named, because I do not know how to talk about myself without naming it. I was raised in the Marcy houses. The Marcy houses are a public housing project in Bedford-Stuyvesant. The Marcy houses, when I was small, were the entire world. The Marcy houses had stairwells, courtyards, basketball courts, benches, deli storefronts, bus stops, and approximately 800 apartments stacked into towers, in which an entire generation of Black children in the late 1970s and the 1980s were trying to figure out how to grow up in the country we had been born into. The Marcy houses were not, contrary to the version some of you may have heard about them, only a hard place. The Marcy houses were a community. The Marcy houses were the place where, on a Saturday in summer, the smell of food in the hallway told you whose grandmother was awake. The Marcy houses were the place where, on a Sunday morning, you could tell which apartment had the gospel station on by the rhythm of the bass through the walls. I learned to listen in the Marcy houses. I learned to read a room by listening. I learned that a man who is paying attention can hear in any building where the safety is and where the danger is, and which doors are about to open and which doors are about to close, and that this skill, the listening, was the only skill that was going to keep me alive in the years I was about to walk into. My father is named Adnis. My father left when I was about 11 years old. He left in the way that men in our community sometimes left, which is to say, without ceremony and without explanation and without a forwarding address. My mother did not say anything about him for a long time. My mother is named Gloria. My mother is the most important person in this entire book, because she is the woman who taught me how to be the kind of man who would, much later, be ready to be married to the woman whose name is on the cover of this book, next to mine. I want to be precise about my mother. My mother did not make a sound about the absence. My mother made the soup. My mother put the soup on the table. My mother walked to her job. My mother came home from her job. My mother sat down at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. when she thought all 4 of her children were asleep, and let her face do for 15 minutes what her face had not been allowed to do for the rest of the day. I saw her face one of those nights. I was 9. I was supposed to be asleep. I was on the way to the bathroom. I caught her at the table and I saw, through the doorway, what a Black mother's face looks like at the end of a day in 1979 when nobody is watching. I saw it. I was 9. I have, in the 46 years since, never forgotten it. That is the woman who raised me. That is the woman whose voice I was carrying in the back of my head every minute of every day when I started, in the years that followed, to make some of the choices a Brooklyn boy in the 1980s made when he had been left by a father and was trying, on his own, to figure out how to feed himself in a world that was not, in those years, particularly interested in feeding him. I am not going to spend a long time in this book on the chapters of my life I have already rapped about for 30 years. Those chapters are on the public record. Those chapters are in the music. Those chapters are mine. What I will tell you for the purposes of this love story is that the man I had become by the time I was 30 years old in late 1999, in a hotel suite in some city or another that I do not even remember now, with a record deal and a label of my own and a watch on my wrist that 10 years earlier would have meant nothing to a Marcy boy and now meant the only thing. That man was a man with a wall around him. A particular kind of wall, the kind of wall a boy puts up at 11 when his father walks out, and that the man, 20 years later, does not yet know how to take down. I had not yet, by 30, met the woman who was going to ask me, gently, to take it down. I was about to meet her. I was, by some count, about to be ready. Chapter 3, Beyoncé, Destiny's Child. I want to do a brief chapter on the years before I met the man who would later be my husband, because if I do not do a brief chapter on those years, the meeting will not make sense. The years before were Destiny's Child. Destiny's Child was the group I was in from the time I was 9 years old, in different versions, with different members, with different names, in different states of Polish and unpolish, until the early 2000s. Destiny's Child was a job. Destiny's Child was a school. Destiny's Child was a discipline. Destiny's Child was, in the way of any group of working teenagers, a small economy of friendships and rivalries, and small private heartbreaks that the public never fully saw, and that, for those of us who were inside it, made us into the women we are today. I want to be clear about something the public has had a lot of opinions about over the years, which is the shape of Destiny's Child by the time we became the version of ourselves the world remembers. The version the world remembers is me, Kelly Rowland, and Michelle Williams. Kelly is, by every measure I have ever used, a sister. Kelly came into our family when we were still children. Kelly grew up in our house. Kelly is, in the way of a girl who grew up in another family's house, a daughter of my mother in every way that matters that is not biological. Michelle came in later. Michelle came in by faith. Michelle came in the way a member of any family comes in late and turns out to have been the one we were waiting for. The three of us are, to this day, three of the most important people in each other's lives. I do not want this chapter to be a press release. I want this chapter to be honest. So I will say something honest. There were years inside Destiny's Child that were hard. There were lineup changes. There were public arguments about who was the lead and who was not. There were lawyers and contracts and parents as managers, and the kind of pressure that lands on a teenage girl who has been told she is the lead, and that, if she does not deliver, the rest of the women in the room are going to have to find another job. I carried that pressure for a lot of years. I carried it badly some of the time. I carried it well some of the time. I carried it, mostly, alone. I was 20 years old by the time the group became the version of itself the world thinks of when the world thinks of Destiny's Child. I had been a working singer for 11 years. I had been a working singer longer than most working singers had been alive. I had not, in those 11 years, had what most 20-year-old women in any country call a real boyfriend. I had had crushes. I had had small dating situations. I had had the kind of brief, complicated, half-hidden relationships that a working pop star has, with the kind of men who are willing to date a woman whose calendar is not her own. I had not had a partner. I had not had a phone call that lasted 3 hours. I had not had a friend who happened to be a man who was content to be a friend before he was anything else. I was 20 years old. I was in a hotel suite in some city or another. The phone in my hand rang. I picked it up. The voice on the other end of it was the voice of a man I had met, casually, at an industry thing, sometime that year. The man was older than me. The man was, by the standards of the world we were both in, a much bigger deal than I was, which is itself a sentence I want you to hold, because by 2001 I was already a girl whose face was on a magazine cover, and the fact that this man was a bigger deal than me tells you what kind of man he had already become. The voice on the other end of the phone said, "B." I said, "Hi." He said, "You got a minute?" I said, "I have several." He said, "All right, let me tell you about my day." He told me about his day. That phone call was the first one. there would, over the next year and a half, be a few hundred more. Chapter 4. Jay-Z Rockefeller. By 1999, I had, by the rules of the game I had been playing, won. I want you to understand what winning looked like in the music industry version of winning in 1999. Winning looked like a label of my own called Rockefeller that I had founded with 2 other men a few years earlier with the kind of starting money that would, by the standards of any other industry, not have been enough to start a side hustle, much less a record company. Winning looked like a debut album called Reasonable Doubt that had come out in 1996 and that the streets had received the way you want the streets to receive your debut album. Winning looked like 5 more albums in the next 4 years, in a creative run nobody in the industry had seen at that pace, by an artist whose hometown was a project in Brooklyn most of the buyers had never been inside of. Winning looked like a Grammy, then several Grammys. Winning looked like a deal where, by the late 1990s, I was no longer signing my name to a contract I had not partially written. Winning in 1999 looked like everything I had told myself at 14 I was going to need. Winning was not, in 1999, looking like enough. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I do not want to do the thing where a successful man complains in print about the burdens of his success. I am not complaining. I am describing. The description is this: the wall I had built when I was 11, when my father walked out, was still up. The wall had let me make all of the moves I had made. The wall had let me do the work. The wall had also, by 1999, started to feel in the small interior way nobody else could feel for me, like the very thing that was going to keep me from being able to do the next thing. The next thing, although I did not yet know it, was going to require a person on the other side of the wall. I had, by 1999, dated. I am not going to put a long list in this book, because the long list does not belong in this book. The list is not the love story. The list is the pre-list. What I will tell you is that the women I had been dating, up until the point I met the woman whose name is on the cover of this book with mine, had all of them been women I could keep on my side of the wall. None of them had asked me to take the wall down. Some of them had not noticed the wall. Some of them had noticed the wall and decided to live next to it. Some of them had been kept on the other side of the wall by me, on purpose, because the other side of the wall was the only side I had been letting any woman onto for 20 years. The first time I met Beyoncé, casually, at an industry event in 1999 or 2000, I have, in the years since, been asked which one, and I will tell you in this book what I have always told the press, which is, I do not remember the date precisely, and the imprecision is the truth. I noticed something I had not noticed before about a woman in any room. I noticed that she was paying attention to me the way I was paying attention to her. I want you to read that sentence twice. I noticed that she was paying attention to me the way I was paying attention to her. We were both in the same room doing the listening I had learned in the Marcy houses. We were both in the same room, reading the room. We were both in the same room, picking up which doors were about to open and which were about to close. And we were both in the same room, the calmest 2 people in it, and the calm in her was the same shape as the calm in me. And I had not, in my entire life, been in a room with a woman whose calm I had recognized. I got her number that night. or I gave her mine. I have, in 26 years of being asked, not been able to keep straight which way the exchange went, and I have decided that the inability to keep that detail straight is the truest sign that the exchange happened in the right way, which is to say, it was not a maneuver. It was a small, mutual, unmaneuvered transfer. Two people who had both already noticed each other, exchanging a way to find each other again. I called her, or she called me. Either way, by some night not long after, we were on the phone for an hour. By the next phone call, we were on the phone for 2 hours. By the time the phone calls had become a habit, I had stopped counting. I did not, in those phone calls, tell her about the wall. I did not have to. She had already, in the way of a girl who had grown up in Houston with her mother and her sister, clocked it the moment she met me, and she was, very gently, on her side of the wall, putting her hand against the bricks, and waiting for me to feel her hand through them. Part 2. Friends First. Chapter 5. Beyoncé. The phone call. Let me tell you about the phone calls, because the phone calls are the foundation, and the foundation is the part of this book most people skip when they tell the story. They skip to the wedding. They skip to Crazy in Love. They skip to Lemonade. They skip to 444. They skip the part that mattered most. The part that mattered most was 1.5 years on the phone. I was 18 years old when the phone calls started. I was 19 when the phone calls became a habit. I was 20 when the phone calls became the spine of my emotional life. I had not, in those 18, then 19, then 20 years, had any version of an emotional life that was not also a stage life. The phone calls were the first thing in my adult life that did not have a stage attached to them. He would call, or I would call. There was no script, there was no goal, there were no producers in the room, because there was no room. There were 2 phones, in 2 cities, on 2 coasts sometimes, in 2 hotels sometimes, in 2 studios sometimes, and the 2 phones were the entire architecture of what was happening between us. Architecture is the right word. The phone calls were not a feeling. The phone calls were a structure. We were building something on those phone calls that neither of us, at the time, could see the blueprint of, but that, 26 years later, is still standing. I have been asked many times what we talked about. I have been asked it on red carpets. I have been asked it in interviews. I have been asked it by women whose husbands they met at a bar, who were trying to figure out, in real time, whether the friendship first version of meeting a man could be applied to their own already adult lives. I have given a version of the answer many times. The version I have given many times is true. We talked about everything. We talked about our families. We talked about our work. We talked about the songs we were each working on. We talked about the men in his life and the women in mine and the cities we had each grown up in. I have not, in all of those answers, given the deeper answer. The deeper answer is this. We talked about the things we had not yet figured out how to say to anyone else. He told me about his father. I told him about my father. He told me about the Marcy houses on a Sunday morning when the bass came through the wall. I told him about my mother's hands and the dresses she had made out of curtains. He told me about the boys he had grown up with, and the ones who had not made it, and the ones who had made it, but had paid a kind of cost he was still learning to count. I told him about the other girls in the early Destiny's Child lineups. and the way their mothers had hugged me even after their daughters had been let go, and the way I had, at 12, learned to carry their absence in my body as a thing I was responsible for. We told each other the things you do not tell the man at the bar. We told each other on the phone in the year and a half before either of us had a stage to perform on for the other one. I did not, during those phone calls, plan to marry him. I want to put that on the page. I did not plan to marry him during the phone calls. I planned, during the phone calls, only to keep having the phone calls. The plan, when it came later. The plan, when it came easily, because the foundation had already been built. I used to tell young women, when they asked me about my marriage, the same 5-word sentence I had said to him around our 15th phone call in a hotel room in somewhere late at night, when he had asked me what I wanted. I had said, "I want to be friends." He had said, "All right." He had said it the way a man says it when he had been waiting to be told he was allowed to be a friend before he was anything else, and had not, in his entire adult life, been told it. We were friends. The dating was 18 months later. The dating was the easiest thing either of us had ever done. Chapter 6. Jay-Z, a year and a half. I want to do a chapter on patience, because patience is the part nobody believes I am capable of, and patience is the part this love story stands on. I had not, by the time I met Beyoncé, been a patient man with women. I am not going to dress this up. I had been a man who moved fast. I had been a man who knew how to close a deal. I had been a man whose entire industry rewarded me for a certain kind of confidence around women, which is a confidence that does not always make space for the other person's pace. I am putting that on the page first, because if I do not put it on the page first, the rest of this chapter is a brag, and I am not interested, at this point in my life, in bragging about a thing it took me a long time to learn. I learned patience on the phone with my future wife. I learned it because she taught me. I learned it because she did not, in any of the early phone calls, give me the option of not learning it. She was, on those calls, 18 and then 19 and then 20 years old, and I was 30 and then 31 and then 32, and the math of who should have been teaching whom was, on paper, exactly backwards from what was actually happening in the room. I was the one being taught. She was the one teaching. She was teaching by example. The example was, this is what a phone call sounds like when neither person is in a hurry. This is what a friendship sounds like when neither person is auditioning. This is what the building of a foundation sounds like when the foundation is not being built for anybody else's eyes. I had to slow down. I want to be precise about how slow. I had to slow down to her pace, which was a Houston girl pace that had nothing to do with my Brooklyn man pace, and which had been refined through 11 years of being a working singer in a girl group, and which knew exactly how much air a sentence could take before the sentence stopped being a sentence and started being an unfinished promise. She did not finish other people's sentences. She did not rush her own. She left silences in the middle of conversations that, in any other room with any other woman I had ever known, I would have rushed in to fill, and she taught me, by not filling them herself, that the silences were not problems to solve. The silences were the conversation. I have, in the entire rest of my life since, been a different kind of listener because of the silences in those phone calls. I am writing this book because of the silences in those phone calls. I am still married because of the silences in those phone calls. A year and a half is a long time to be on the phone with a woman you have not yet kissed. I want to put that on the page also, because by the standards of my own industry, by the standards of any industry, by the standards of the world I was running in at 31, a year and a half of phone calls without dating was eccentric. Some of my friends did not understand it. Some of them had opinions, some of them in private, in the back of cars, on the way home from clubs, asked me, in the small joking way men ask each other, when I was going to either pull the trigger or move on. I told them, every time, what I told myself every time. I am not in a hurry. I have been in a hurry for 30 years. I am not in a hurry now. The truth, which I did not say to my friends, was simpler. I had not, in my entire adult life, been a man on the other side of the wall with a woman who had asked me to take it down. I was, in a year and a half of phone calls, taking it down, brick by brick, phone call by phone call, with the one woman in the world who had figured out, before I did, that the wall was the only thing standing between me and the rest of my life. By the time we went on our first date, the wall was almost down. The first date was easier than any of the phone calls had been. The first date was almost an anticlimax, in the best sense of that word, because the architecture had already been built, and we were just walking through it. Chapter 7. Beyoncé. The first date. I am not going to tell you where the first date was, because the first date is one of the only pieces of our marriage we have kept off the public record, and I am going to keep it off this record too. What I will tell you is that it was a quiet place. It was a place neither of us had been before. It was a place where neither of us had to perform any of the public versions of ourselves, and where, for several hours, we were two people on the other side of a year and a half of phone calls, finally face to face, finally allowed to look at each other across a table. I had by then dressed up for the date. I want to be honest about that. I had by then picked an outfit. I had by then asked my mother her opinion of the outfit. I had by then called Kelly to talk about the fact of the date, and Kelly had said, in her sister of mine way, the only sentence Kelly says when one of her sisters is about to do a brave thing. She said, "All right, go." I went. He was at the table when I got there. He stood up when I came in. I had not, before that moment, ever seen him stand up for me. The phone calls had not, by definition, given me a stand-up moment. The phone calls had not given me his hand on my back as I came in, or his eyes on my face as I crossed the room, or the way the planes of his face shifted when he saw me. When he saw me, after a year and a half, in a way that meant, "Oh, there you are." I had been there the whole time. I had been on the phone the whole time. Now I was in the room. We sat down. We ordered. We did not, for several minutes, fill the air with the kind of date talk two people on a first date sometimes use to fill the air, because we did not need to. We had filled the air for a year and a half, on the phone. We had filled the silences too. We had taught each other, on those calls, that the silences were the conversation. So we let the silences be the conversation, in the restaurant, on the first date, the way we had let them be the conversation on the phone. I want to tell you the moment in the date that I knew. The moment was about an hour in. He had by then said something funny. I had laughed. He had looked at me, the way he had been looking at me all night, with a kind of soft attention I had not, in any of my dating life before that, had a man pay me. He had said, after my laughter died down, "B." I said, He said, "Are you all right?" It was not a date question. It was a friend question. He had, in a year and a half of phone calls, asked me that question many times. He had earned the right to ask it. He had earned the right because he had, on the other end of every previous phone call, listened to my answer when I did not have a good one. I said, in the restaurant, what I had said to him several times on the phone. I said, "Today I am." He said, "All right." He took my hand across the table. That was the first time he touched me. I had, until that moment, only ever heard his voice. Now I had his hand. The hand was bigger than I had expected. The hand was warmer than I had expected. The hand was, somehow, exactly the right hand, which I now believe is what every woman discovers at the moment she first holds the hand of the man who is going to marry her, even if she does not know it yet. We did not, that night, do anything the gossip pages would have wanted to write about. We had dinner, we talked, he paid. We left the restaurant separately because the cameras would have been there if we had left together, and we had decided on the phone weeks earlier that whatever this was going to be, the cameras would not be the first witnesses. I went home that night to a hotel suite. I sat on the bed. I called my mother. I said, "Mama." She said, "Mm-hmm." I said, "I went on the date." She said, "All right." I said, "I think this is the one." She said, "I know." I said, "You knew." She said, "I knew the first time you said his name on the phone, 6 months ago, in the kitchen, when you thought you were just telling me about a friend. That was my mother. That has always been my mother. Tina Knowles, in a kitchen in Houston, on the phone with a daughter in a hotel in some city, knowing the future the daughter was still pretending was the present. I am keeping him," I told her. She said, "I know." Chapter 8. Jay-Z, Bonnie, and Clyde. The way the world found out about us was a song. I want to tell you about the song because the song was a deliberate thing, and a deliberate thing in our relationship is rarer than it might look from the outside. We had been dating at that point for a few months. The phone call architecture had quietly become a relationship. We had figured out, in private, that we wanted to be each other's people. The next question was when and how the rest of the world was going to be told. I had a song. I had a song called "Oh, Three Bonnie and Clyde" that was already mostly written. The song was about a man and a woman who had each other's backs, in the way Bonnie and Clyde had each other's backs in the old movie, in the way two people who are doing something other people are watching always have each other's backs. The song needed a woman's voice on it. The song needed her voice on it specifically. The song was, in retrospect, the perfect way to introduce her to my world and to introduce me to hers, because the song let both of us be artists first and a couple second, and that ordering, artists first, couple second, has been the right ordering for the entire 26 years we have known each other. I asked her to record the duet. She said yes. We recorded it. She put a chorus on the song that the song needed. The song became "Oh, Three Bonnie and Clyde." The song was released in late 2002. The song was, by the standards of music videos at the time, a significant deal. The song's video had us in a yellow car, in matching denim, with our hands intertwined, doing the thing the song was about, which was riding together. We promoted the song on MTV's Total Request Live. I want to put that on the page because it is the moment most people remember, and because I remember it too. We came out together. We were in matching denim. The audience screamed. Carson Daly asked us about the song. He asked us at one point how long we had known each other. She said, before I could answer, we met a long time ago. She said it the way she had said many things in the year and a half before, on the phone, calmly, exactly, with a kind of small smile that meant, this is the public version, and the public version is true, and I am not going to give the deeper version on television. I did not say anything. I let her say it. I had learned by then when to let her be the front of the room and when to be the front of the room myself. The duet between us on the phone calls had taught me. The duet between us in the studio had taught me. The duet between us on the MTV stage had been the public confirmation that the duet existed. We left the studio together. We got into a car together. The doors closed. The driver pulled away. We sat in the back seat, in matching denim, in the same posture two people in matching denim sit in. She put her head on my shoulder. I put my arm around her. She said, into the side of my neck. That was easier than I thought it would be. I said, the year and a half on the phone is paying off. She said, you are funny. I said sometimes. She laughed. The car drove. Whatever we had been on the phone for a year and a half was now a thing the world knew about. We had given the world the song. The world had taken the song. The harder thing, the marriage, we had kept. The marriage was still ours. The marriage would, in 5.5 more years, be sealed on a 4th day of a 4th month in a Tribeca penthouse with 70,000 white orchids from Thailand in front of 40 people, with all of their phones in a basket at the door. Part 3, The Wedding. Chapter 9, Beyoncé. The Proposal. Here is the proposal, because the proposal is a chapter most love stories about us either skip or get wrong, and I have a small amount of truth I would like to offer about it that I have not put on a public record before. The proposal was on December the 4th, 2007. December the 4th is his birthday. He turned 38 on the day he asked me to marry him. He turned 38, and he asked me to marry him. In that order, in the same evening, and the order is important. He asked me on the day he turned 38 because he had by then decided that the next year of his life, his 38th, was going to be a different kind of year than the first 37 had been. He had decided this several months earlier on a phone call I am not going to fully transcribe in this book, in which he had said something to me about what he had been and what he wanted to become. And I had heard in his voice, a thing I had not yet heard in his voice in 7 years of knowing him. I had heard him be ready. The number 4, by then, had become a thing in our lives. I want you to remember that I was born on September the 4th in 1981. Remember that he was born on December the 4th in 1969. Remember that the 2 4ths in our birthdays had been a small joke between us on the phone since the first month we had known each other. Remember also that in our community, when a thing recurs, you do not call it a coincidence, you call it a sign. We had been calling the 4 between us a sign for a long time. He proposed on a 4th. He proposed in the evening. He proposed in a room I am not going to fully describe in this book, because the room is one of the rooms I am keeping. He proposed without a camera, without a producer, without an audience, without an Instagram, without the stage that has, before and after that night, been the architecture of most of the public moments of our lives. He proposed on a couch. The couch was the couch. The couch had a blanket on it that one of our families had given to one of us at some point, and that I am not going to identify which family it was, because the blanket is also one of the things I am keeping. He took my hand. He said, "B." I said yes. He laughed. He said, "You have not heard the question." I said, "I have been hearing the question for 7 years. The question is, are you mine?" The answer has been yes for 7 years. I am tired of saying yes in my own head. Today I am saying yes out loud. On the day you have decided to ask. On the 4th. On the day you turn 38. In the year you decided to be the next version of yourself. He looked at me. He had on his face the expression I had, in those 7 years, learned to recognize. The expression was the small, still expression he gets when a woman has, in his presence, said something he had not, until that moment, fully realized she was capable of saying. He had not, until that moment, fully realized I was capable of asking the question myself, on his behalf, from the inside of 7 years of friendship. I had been able to ask it because the friendship had been 7 years long. I had been able to ask it because the foundation was built. He gave me the ring. I am not going to describe the ring, because the ring is also one of the things I am keeping. He put the ring on my finger. We sat on the couch with the blanket from the family for a long time without saying anything. Eventually, he kissed the top of my head. Eventually, I put my head on his shoulder. Eventually, one of us suggested we should probably eat something, because it was, by then, his birthday, and a man's mother somewhere in Brooklyn would, the next morning, want to know whether her son had eaten on his 38th birthday or not. We ate. We did not tell anyone for a long time. Some things you keep before you give them away. Chapter 10. Jay-Z. April 4th, 2008. 4 months and a day after the proposal, on April the 4th, in 2008, in a Tribeca penthouse in Lower Manhattan, in front of 40 people whose phones had been collected in a basket at the door, I married my friend. I want to put on the page first that I am calling her my friend, in the sentence about marrying her, on purpose. I have said many words to describe her in 26 years of being asked. I have said wife. I have said B. I have said the name nobody who is not in our family is allowed to say in any room she is also in. I have said, on records, 6 different small private versions of her name. The truest word, on the day I married her, was friend. I was marrying my friend. The wedding was the public confirmation of a friendship that had by then been a relationship for 6 years and a friendship for 7.5. The dress was the celebration of the friendship. The orchids were the celebration of the friendship. The 40 people were the celebration of the friendship. The number 4 was the celebration of the friendship. I want to tell you what I remember. I remember waiting at the front of the room. I remember the way the light through the windows of the penthouse fell on the floor in the late afternoon. I remember my mother in the front row, in the chair we had picked for her. I remember my grandmother in the chair next to my mother, holding my mother's hand. I remember Kelly Rowland standing where she was supposed to stand, at the front of the room on Beyoncé's side. I remember Michelle Williams doing the same. I remember Solange. I remember Solange's face as the woman who was about to give her sister to me, doing the work of being okay with the giving. I remember her father, Matthew, who was, in those years, still her manager, and who would, in 3 more years, no longer be her manager. Although on this particular day, on the 4th of April in 2008, he was the man who walked her down the aisle. I remember the doors opened. I remember she came in. I remember I was, in that moment, a man with no wall. I want to put that on the page. I had walked into the room with no wall. I had not, in my entire adult life until that day, been in a room with no wall. The phone calls had taken the wall down. The dating had taken the wall down. The 7 years of friendship had taken the wall down. The proposal 4 months earlier had taken the wall down. The morning of the wedding, I had stood in front of a mirror in the penthouse, in the bathroom of the bedroom we had been sharing for several years by then, and I had looked at myself, and I had said, out loud, into the mirror, in a voice neither of my parents had ever taught me to use, all right. The wall was down. The bride was coming. She came down the aisle. Her mother had made the dress. The dress was strapless. The dress had a sweetheart neckline. The dress had a long train. The dress had a long veil. I am not the kind of man who is good at describing dresses, and I will not be embarrassed to admit it. What I will tell you about the dress is what I have told her every April the 4th of every year since, that her mother is a gift to all of us, and that there is a specific kind of black girl couture genius that the world has not yet fully understood, and that her mother is one of the women who has been quietly making it for 40 years, and that the woman who walked down the aisle toward me on April the 4th of 2008 was wearing both her mother's hands and her own face, and the combination was the thing my eyes were unable, for several minutes, to look directly at. I held it together. I want to put that on the page also. I held it together. I have, in 26 years of being a public person, become reasonably good at holding it together. The wedding was one of the only moments I have ever almost lost it. I almost lost it when she got to me. I almost lost it when she handed her flowers to Kelly. I almost lost it when she put her hand in mine. I almost lost it when she said the vows. I almost lost it when I said mine. I did not, in the public record of that day, lose it. I am willing in this book to admit that on the inside I lost it 10 times. We said the vows. The vows are private. The vows will stay private. What I will tell you from inside the vows is the one sentence I said to her that I have, in the 18 years since, never said in any other context. I said, B, I am yours, and I am not coming back without you. She said, all right. The minister did the rest. The room did the rest. The orchids did the rest. We were married. The number 4 had done its work. The friendship, after 7.5 years, was a marriage. Chapter 11, Beyoncé, the Tribeca penthouse. The first thing I want to tell you after the wedding is what the apartment was like the next morning. I want to tell you because the next morning of a wedding is the chapter most love stories skip. The next morning is the part where you find out who the man you have just married is, in his own kitchen, when no one is looking. The next morning is the part where, after the orchids have been packed up, and the chairs have been folded, and the catering has been broken down, and the family has gone home, and the dog has been walked, the two of you are alone, for the first time in your married life, in the room you are about to share. The Tribeca penthouse was a beautiful place. It is not anymore my place, in the sense that we have not lived there in a long time. But in 2008, It was the only place either of us had really thought of as home together. The penthouse was 13,500 square feet of Manhattan air. The penthouse had windows that faced the river. The penthouse had a kitchen that was bigger than the apartment my mother had lived in Houston, for the first 10 years of my life. The penthouse had, on the morning after the wedding, the small private silence that follows a big event in a big space. I woke up early. I had not slept much. He was still asleep. He was on his back. He had one arm on his chest and the other arm out, palm up, on the mattress between us. I have, in 18 years of being his wife, watched that posture more times than I can count. The open palm on the mattress between us is the most truthful thing about the man I married. The open palm says, "I am here." The open palm says, "You can find me." The open palm says, "I am not closed." I put my hand into his open hand. He woke up. He did not say anything. He did the thing he does, which is squeeze my hand once before he says anything, in the way of a man telling a woman. I felt that, before he tells her with words. He said, eventually, "Wife." I said, "Husband." He said, "Do you want coffee?" I said, "Yes." He got up. He made coffee. He brought it to the bed. He had on the t-shirt he had been wearing the night before because the wedding clothes were on chairs all over the room and we had not yet hung them up. He sat on the edge of the bed. He gave me the coffee. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Eventually, you are my wife." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am your husband." I said, "Yes." He said, "I am going to get up and walk through this apartment now, in this t-shirt, and start the rest of our life." I said, "All right." He stood up. He walked through the apartment. He walked through the apartment in a t-shirt and shorts, with no audience, with no producer, with no camera, with no stage. He looked at the windows. He looked at the kitchen. He looked at the rooms we had picked together. He came back to the bed. He said, "I have walked through it." I said, "And?" He said, "This is ours." I said, "This is ours." He said, "All right." That was the second start of our marriage. The first start had been the wedding. The first start had been public. The second start was that morning, in a t-shirt, with the coffee, with the open palm on the mattress, with a slow walk through the apartment. The second start was the start the cameras did not see and were never going to see, and which I have, in the 18 years since, decided is the start that matters. The cameras get the wedding. The marriage gets the morning after. Chapter 12, Jay-Z, the first year. I want to tell you what the first year of being married looked like, because the first year of being married is the part most love stories also skip, and I have a piece of truth about the first year that I would like to offer. The first year was hard. I want to put that on the page first, because if I do not put it on the page first, the rest of the chapter is a lie. The first year was hard. We had by then been in each other's lives for 7.5 years. We had by then been in each other's beds for several years. We had by then been at each other's family Christmases and Thanksgivings and birthdays. We had by then learned, on the phone and in our apartments, the small daily habits of how the other person operated. We had not, until the wedding, been married to each other. Marriage is not the same as the things that come before marriage. I want to be specific about why. Marriage is the contract. Marriage is the thing where, on a Tuesday, when you do not feel like being your spouse's spouse, you have to be your spouse's spouse anyway. because you have signed a thing in front of God and in front of 40 people that says you are going to be. The being your spouse's spouse on the Tuesday, you do not feel like it is the marriage. Everything before that is, however lovely, not yet the marriage. We had Tuesdays in the first year I had not anticipated. I want to tell you about one of them. The Tuesday I am thinking of was a weekday in the early winter of 2008, about 8 months into our marriage. We had both had a hard week. I had been in the studio. She had been in promotion for a record. We had each been gone in different cities for several days, and we had come home to the penthouse on the same evening, both tired, both irritable, both the smaller version of ourselves we tended to be when we had not eaten dinner. We had a small fight. I am not going to dramatize the small fight, because the small fight was not a real fight. The small fight was about something neither of us actually cared about. The small fight was a hungry, tired fight. The small fight was a fight we have, in 18 years of marriage, had several variations of, and which, in 18 years of marriage, has never actually been about what we said it was about. The small fight ended with both of us in different rooms of the penthouse for about 45 minutes. I want to tell you what I did during those 45 minutes, because the 45 minutes were the most important Tuesday of our first year of marriage. I did not, in the 45 minutes, decide that I had been wrong. I did not, in the 45 minutes, decide that I had been right. I did not, in the 45 minutes, write a list of grievances. I did not, in the 45 minutes, call any of my friends to vent. I did, in the 45 minutes, sit on the couch in the room I had walked into, with my elbows on my knees, and ask myself, in the language my mother had taught me, which is the only language I have ever asked myself anything important in, the question my mother would have asked me had she been in the room. The question was, are you the man you said you were going to be? I sat with the question for a long time. The answer was, on that particular Tuesday, no. The answer was, I had been the smaller version of myself in the kitchen 45 minutes earlier. The answer was, the woman I had married deserved the larger version, and the larger version had been, that night, asleep in a room of my own personality. I had not yet woken up. I got up off the couch. I walked across the apartment. She was in the kitchen, where I had left her. She was at the counter, where I had left her, with a glass of water in her hand, with her back to the door. I came in. I put my hand on her back, between her shoulder blades. I said, "B." She said, I said, "I was small in there." She said, "Yes." I said, "I am sorry." She said, "All right." She turned around. She put her hand on my chest. She did not say anything. She did the thing she does, which is wait until the apology is in the room before she lets the apology become the room. The apology became the room. We did not have that fight again. We have, in the 18 years since, had other fights. We will have more. We are having one probably somewhere in the future that we have not yet had, that we will, when the time comes, also figure out how to walk back from. The first year of marriage taught me that the walking back is the marriage. The walking back is what the wedding was promising. The walking back is what the orchids and the dress and the 40 guests and the basket of phones at the door were all pointing at. The walking back on the Tuesday in the kitchen in the 8th month of our marriage was the foundation under everything that came after. Part 4. The Hard Years. Chapter 13. Beyoncé. Blue Ivy. Here is the day I told the world I was pregnant, because the day was a planned day, and the plan was my idea. It was the 28th of August, 2011, the MTV Video Music Awards. I had been performing my song, Love on Top, in a sequin tuxedo in front of an audience that did not yet know what was about to happen. I had been pregnant, by then, for several months. We had not told anybody. We had not told my mother. We had not told his mother. We had not told my sister. We had told 2 people, and the 2 people were the doctor and the husband, and the doctor was not going to be the one who told. I want to be careful in this chapter, because there are pieces of the earlier chapters that the public also did not see, and that I am going to leave on the floor here, because the pieces are not mine alone, and I do not, in this book, have the right to put them down for both of us. I will say only this. Becoming pregnant with our oldest daughter took us a long time. There were things that did not work. There were chapters of our trying that the husband, much later, would put into a song that the world would hear before it knew what the song was about. There were chapters that my own face, in interviews on the carpet, in those years, was carrying without telling the carpet. There were chapters in my own body that I had to learn how to carry, and that I am not going to put down here, because the chapters are between me and God, and my mother, and the man I am married to, and they will stay there. What I will tell you is the moment on the stage at the VMAs. I finished the song. I unbuttoned the tuxedo jacket. I put my hand on my stomach. I opened my hand. The stadium did the thing the stadium had not, in all the previous performances I had ever given, done. The stadium screamed in a way that was not for the song. The stadium screamed the way a stadium screams when, in the middle of a show, the show has been redirected in real time to a piece of news the stadium had not expected. The stadium understood, before any caption appeared on any screen, what the open hand on the stomach meant. I had broken the world's pregnancy news with my own hand. I had done it on purpose. I had done it because I had wanted, after a long time of trying, to be the one to say it. I had done it because, after years of headlines being about me without my permission, I wanted the biggest headline of my life so far to be one I had personally made on a stage, in a tuxedo I had personally chosen, in a posture I had personally choreographed. The hand on the stomach was the headline. The hand on the stomach was mine. Backstage after the song in the dressing room, my husband was waiting. He had been in the audience. He had stood up when I had opened the hand. He had been filmed by every camera in the building, doing a small private thing in the audience that the camera caught, which was a small involuntary smile he gives only when he is the most proud of me and is least aware of being filmed. He had then walked very quickly to the back of the building, to the dressing room, to wait for me. When I came in, he was on the couch. He stood up. He came over. He put both his hands on my face. He said, "B." I said, He said, "You broke the news with your hand." I said, "I did." He said, "She is going to be told when she is older that her mother announced her with a tuxedo." I said, "She is." He said, "All right." He kissed my forehead. He sat down on the couch. He pulled me down next to him. We sat there for a long time. The dressing room had makeup lights, and a small couch, and a clothing rack, and a basket of bottled water, and the dressing room had, in that moment, the only two people in the world who knew, between them, what the entire stadium had just stood up for. She was born in January. Her name is Blue Ivy Carter. The first name is for a color that is the color of all the most important rooms my mother and I had ever decorated together. The middle name is for the number that has been the spine of our love story since the first phone call. The last name is the husband's. The whole name, said out loud, is the song the rest of our family has been singing since 2012. I want to tell you what he did the first night she was home from the hospital. He did the same thing he had done every night of the 7.5 years of friendship before the wedding. He put his hand on the mattress between us, palm up, in the open posture, in the only posture I had ever known him to sleep in. He went to sleep. His daughter was on my chest. His hand was open between us. I have, in the 14 years since that first night, put my hand into his hand more times than I have done any other physical thing in my marriage. The hand has come every time. The hand always comes. Chapter 14. Jay-Z, the father he never had. I want to tell you what becoming a father was for me, because if I do not, the chapters that come after this one are going to be missing the spine. I am the son of a man who left when I was 11. I am not the only one. I am one of about 100 million black men in the country who are sons of men who left. I do not, in this book, want to pretend that my father's leaving was a unique thing. The leaving was not unique. The leaving was, for the men of my generation, in the city I grew up in the way of being raised in America in the 1970s and 1980s, ordinary. What was not ordinary for me was that I had spent 30+ years carrying the leaving as a thing I had not yet learned how to put down. The leaving was the wall. The leaving was the silence on the other side of every conversation I had ever tried to have with another woman before my wife. The leaving was the thing my wife had felt with her hand on the bricks in the early phone calls, before either of us had any words for what was on the other side. I had reconciled with my father briefly, before he died in 2003. I had sat with him. I had said the things a son says to a father when the son has been carrying the absence for a long time. He had said, in his own words, what he could. He had died not long after. I had grieved in a way most of the press did not see at the time. I had written about the grief in songs the press would later cover. By the time my daughter was born, in 2012, the grief had not gone away. The grief had been reshaped. The grief, by 2012, had become a thing I was bringing to the cradle. I want to be honest about that. I had, on the night I brought my daughter home from the hospital, not yet figured out how to be a father. I had figured out how to be a husband. I had figured out how to be the man on the open palm side of the mattress at night. I had not yet figured out how to be the father a daughter is going to need. I had spent 30 years modeling fatherhood by the absence of one. I had only, in the years since reconciling with my own father, started to learn what the presence of one was supposed to feel like, and I had started learning it from a man who was no longer alive to teach me. I had to learn it from the daughter. I want to put that on the page, because it is the line that organized the rest of my fatherhood. I had to learn it from the daughter. She taught me. She was 3 weeks old. She did not know she was teaching. She taught by being 3 weeks old. She taught by being held. She taught by the small noises she made in the night, in the room I had not slept in before she had been alive, in the crib her mother and I had spent 6 months picking. She taught me by being 3 weeks old that the man I had been telling myself I was, the strategist, the listener, the one who held it together, was not, in any way that mattered, the man my daughter needed me to be. She needed a different man. The different man was a softer man. The different man was a man whose hand was not, in fact, the most useful tool he had. The different man was a man whose ear was the most useful tool he had. The different man was a man whose face, on a Tuesday afternoon, would do something I had not seen on my own face in any photograph since I had been about 8. I learned. The learning has not stopped. I am still learning. In 2026, with 3 children, 2 of them now 9, and 1 of them now 14, what fatherhood is. I am learning every day. I am learning mostly from the children. The children are the best teachers I have had. The children are also, by the strange grace of how families work, the only teachers I had not, at 14, expected to find. I want to give you, before this chapter ends, the line that I wrapped on the album I was about to make in the years that followed the morning I am about to describe in the next chapter, because the line is the line that has organized the rest of my marriage. I rapped on the song 444. I apologize, often womanize, took for my child to be born to see through a woman's eyes. The line is on the public record. The line is the line. The line means, briefly, that until my daughter was born, I had not yet figured out how to see the world through the eyes of the woman I was married to. The seeing through is what fatherhood gave me. The seeing through was the gift my daughter, in the act of being born and being 3 weeks old and being held, gave to me. I have, in the years since, tried to use the gift well. I have, in the years since, made some terrible mistakes with the gift. The next chapter is one of them. I want you to keep the gift in mind while you read the next chapter. I want you to remember that the man I am about to describe in the next chapter, who became, for a stretch in the middle of our marriage, less than the man I had promised at the altar, was the same man my daughter had taught to see through a woman's eyes. The teaching was not yet finished. The teaching is still happening. The teaching, on certain stretches of any human life, gets paused. The pause was about to happen. The pause was about to be the worst chapter of our marriage. The pause was also, by some grace neither I nor my wife nor our daughter could have predicted, the chapter that would end up making us into the marriage we are now. Chapter 15, Beyoncé, Lemonade. In April of 2016, I released an album called Lemonade. The album was 1 hour and 5 minutes long. The album had a visual companion, broadcast on HBO, that the world watched on the same night it dropped. The album was about a marriage. The album was about my marriage. The album was about the chapter of my marriage that, by 2016, had been quietly cutting me for a long time, and that I had decided on my own, in the way a black woman in this country sometimes decides things, to put on a record. I am not, in this chapter of this book, going to relitigate the album. The album exists. The album is on the public record. The album is, by now, the property of every woman who needed it when it came out, and every woman who is going to need it in some future year. I will not be alive to see. I am not going to take it back. I am not going to soften it. I am not going to apologize for it. I am also not going to, in this book, name names that the album did not name. I want to put that on the page first, because the naming has been the thing the world has wanted me to do for 10 years. The world wanted me, on the album, to name. I did not. The world wanted me, in the years after the album, to name. I did not. I have decided in this book also not to name. What I will tell you is what is on the public record about the album. The album was called Lemonade after the saying my husband's grandmother, Hattie White, said in a video clip the album included on her 90th birthday. Her saying was, "I had my ups and my downs, but I always find the inner strength to pull myself up. I was served lemons, but I made lemonade." The album took its title from a Carter grandmother. The album took its title, in fact, from his side of the family. I want you to read that twice. The album that is, in the public imagination, an album by his wife about his failures, took its title from his grandmother's mouth. That is also the marriage. The marriage is not always what the headlines say it is. I made the album in a room. I made the album with a small group of writers and producers. I made the album as a single piece of work, with a single arc that begins in suspicion and walks through anger and walks through reckoning and walks through forgiveness and walks through reconciliation and ends in the last song called All Night, with a soft trumpet horn and a line in which I sing about my husband finding a man within him to set up the next album. The album is the chronological version of the marriage, or it is what I needed the chronological version of the marriage to be. I want to tell you what happened in our house the night the album came out. I will tell you because nobody has told you, and because if I do not tell you, somebody will guess, and the guess will be wrong. The night the album came out, my husband and I were in the same room. We had been in the same room, in fact, for months. We had been working on this. We had been in therapy on this. We had been talking. We had been not talking. We had been parents to a 4-year-old daughter who could not yet read all of the lyrics, but who could feel the air. We had been, for months, walking through the most expensive and most painful chapter of our marriage so far, and we had been, in private, in real life, in our own kitchen, making the choice, every Tuesday, to keep doing the work. The album was the public version of the work. The album was the version of the work I needed the world to see, because if the world had not seen it, my own art would have been a lie. He watched the album with me. We watched it on a screen in our own house. He had heard most of the songs. He had not, until that night, watched the visual album as a whole. He had not, until that night, seen, all in one sitting, the size of what I had made. When the album was over, he did not say anything for a long time. He did the thing he does when a thing is large in the room. He sat with it. He let the room hold what had just been said. Eventually, he stood up. He came over to where I was sitting. He kneeled in front of the chair. He took both of my hands. He said, "B." I said, He said, "I see you." I said, "I know." He said, "I am sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "I am going to make my own version." I said, "I know. I want you to read the 4. I knows that I just put on the page. I knew, I knew, I knew, I knew. The knowing is the marriage. The knowing was what the hand on the bricks, 16 years earlier, in the early phone calls, had been listening for. The knowing is what told me, the night we watched Lemonade in our own house with our daughter asleep upstairs, that the marriage was going to survive what I had just put on a record. The knowing is what told me, when he said he was going to make his own version, that he meant it. The knowing is what told me, when he asked me to forgive him, that the forgiveness was already underway. The album was not the end. The album was the middle. The next album from him was coming. Chapter 16. Jay-Z, 4:44. I woke up at 4:44 in the morning. I want to put that on the page first, because it is the line I have already put on a record. I woke up at 4:44 in the morning in our house on a night I had not been able to fall asleep in, with my wife asleep next to me and our daughter asleep down the hall, with a song in my chest that had not yet been written, and I had to get up and write it. The song became 4:44. The song was the song I had owed her and our daughter and our marriage and the public and myself for a long time. I want to tell you what was in me when I sat down to write it. What was in me was the entire history of my own previous failures, which I had been refusing for a long time to say out loud. I had been refusing because saying out loud was a thing I had not learned, growing up, that men in my house did. The men in my house took things underground. The men in my house carried things and did not put them down. The men in my house left when the carrying got too heavy. I had decided when my father had left that I was not going to be the kind of man who left. I had decided instead to be the kind of man who carried. The carrying had let me build a label and a life and a body of work and a family and a marriage. The carrying had also let me, in certain years, in certain rooms, in certain hotel suites, in certain moments. I am not going to put further specifics on in this book, because the specifics are not the love story. Do harm. I had done harm. I want to put that on the page in the simplest possible language, because the language I have used elsewhere, in songs and in interviews, is the language I am proud of. But the language I am proudest of is the simplest one. I had done harm. I had done it to my wife. I had done it to my marriage. I had done it to myself. I had done it to my daughter, although she did not yet know it, and although I hope, by the time she is old enough to know it, the work I have done in the years since will mean she does not have to carry the harm forward as something her father did to her mother that was not, in time, repaired. The repair was the work. The repair, on the night I woke up at 4:44, was the song. I sat down. I wrote. I do not, in this book, want to relitigate the lyrics, because the lyrics are on the public record, and the lyrics are mine, and the lyrics will outlive me. I will tell you only the spine of the song. The spine of the song was an apology. The apology was unconditional. The apology was not contingent on her forgiveness. The apology said, I see what I did. I see who I was. I am not going to be that man anymore. And the not being that man anymore is going to be the work of the rest of my life. I finished the song around 6 in the morning. The light was starting to come in. My wife had not yet woken up. My daughter had not yet woken up. The song was on a piece of paper and on a small audio file on a recorder I keep next to the bed for nights when songs come. I went back into the bedroom. I lay down next to her. She was on her side, facing away. I put my hand on her back, between her shoulder blades, in the place where I had, at the wedding 8 years earlier, watched her mother put her hand on her father's back when his back was tense. I put my hand there. I did not say anything. She woke up after a few minutes. She did not turn over. She knew by the weight of my hand that something had changed. She said, eventually, into the pillow, "What?" I said, "I wrote it." She said, "The song." I said, "The song." She said, "All right." I said, "All right." She did not turn over for a long time. Eventually she did. She put her hand on my chest. She looked at me. She did the thing she does, which is wait for me to be the one who says the thing first, because she has, in 26 years of knowing me, learned that the saying is the point. I said, "B, I apologize." She said, "I know." I said, "Often womanize." She said, "I know." I said, "Took for my child to be born to see through a woman's eyes." She said, "I know." I said, "I am sorry." She said, "All right." That was the moment. That was the early morning, 4:44 a.m., in bed, no camera, no producer moment that the public would, 3 months later, hear a version of when I released the song. The public version was the rap. The rap was the public's version. The version we had between us, in the bed, in the dark, before the day started, was the actual version. The actual version was the version that mattered. The album came out in June of 2017. The world heard it. The world had opinions. The opinions are not, in the long run, what mattered. What mattered was that I had said, in front of God and the world and the wife and the daughter, the apology. The apology was on the record. The apology was, by then, in our private record, already months old. The album was the public ratification. We started over after the album. We had started over before the album also. A marriage that has survived starts over more than once. A marriage that has survived has, in fact, in my own private accounting, started over many times. The album was one of the starts. There were others. There will be more. Chapter 17, Beyoncé, Rebuilding Trust. I want to tell you what rebuilding trust actually meant, because the words rebuilding trust are easy words to say, and the actual work the words describe is not. The actual work was a series of Tuesdays. I want to be specific about the Tuesdays. The Tuesdays were not the Tuesdays of my husband apologizing. The Tuesdays of the apology had already happened. The apology was, by 2017, in the room. The album was in the room. The song 444 was in the room. The interviews were in the room. The therapy was in the room. The Tuesdays of rebuilding trust were the Tuesdays after the apology. I want to put that on the page, because if I do not, women reading this book are going to think the apology is the rebuilding. The apology is not the rebuilding. The apology is the start of the rebuilding. The rebuilding is what happens on the Tuesday 7 months after the apology, when your husband has been in another city for 3 days, and the 3 days have been work days, and the 3 days have been, by every reasonable metric, fine. And you are still, on the Tuesday, he comes home, on the alert, in your own body, in a way you had not been on the alert before. The body remembers. The body does not let the apology, however right the apology was, erase what the body had been told before. The body has to be told a new thing. The body has to be told the new thing again and again, in small repeated installments, on the Tuesday after the Tuesday after the Tuesday, until the body believes it. I am, in 2026, 8.5 years past the album. The body believes it now. He said, "B." I said, He said, "Do you trust me yet?" He said it the way a man asks a wife the question he has not yet been brave enough to ask. He said it without any of the press conference language he is good at. He said it small. He said it like a man who had been waiting for 2 years for the right Tuesday to ask it. I sat with the question for a long time. I said, eventually, in the kitchen, in the hotel suite, with our daughter asleep down the hall, with the twins safe in another country with their grandmother, with the tour about to start the next afternoon, I said, I am starting to. He did not say anything for a long time. He did the thing he does, which is hold the answer in the room without trying to expand it. He said, eventually, all right. I said, all right. He said, take your time. I said, I am. That was the moment the body started to believe it. The body had not yet fully believed it. The body would, in the years that followed, take more time. The body has, in the 8.5 years since, taken all the time it has needed. The body has, in 2026, in this kitchen, in this house, in this evening, settled in a way that the body had not settled before. I want to tell you before this chapter ends what rebuilding trust actually requires of the husband. It requires the husband to be, on every Tuesday after the apology, the man the apology said he was going to be. He has to be that man on the Tuesday. No audience is in the room. He has to be that man on the Tuesday. He is exhausted. He has to be that man on the Tuesday. He is in another city. It requires the husband to be that man on the Tuesday. He is tempted to be the smaller version. It requires the husband to be that man every Tuesday for years without expecting a medal for it. He has been that man. I want to put that on the page in this book because I have not, in any of the previous interviews I have given, put it on the page in exactly that way. He has been that man. The Tuesdays add up. The Tuesdays have by now become a pattern. The pattern is the marriage. I am, in 2026, married to the man my husband became on the Tuesdays after the album, in the kitchen, in the hotel suites, in the houses we have shared, in the rooms no camera has been in. I am keeping him. I have been keeping him. I will keep keeping him. That is the answer to the question he asked me in the hotel suite in Europe in the summer of 2018. The answer was, in the moment, I am starting to. The answer, 8.5 years later in this book, is I have, Chapter 18, Jay-Z, the work. I want to use this chapter to talk about therapy. I am putting that word on the page on purpose. I have, in the years since the album, been one of the few public black men in this country to put the word therapy on records and on stages and in interviews. I want to keep putting the word on the page. I want to put the word on the page in this chapter of this book, because if I do not, the rest of the book is going to make the work I did sound like personal genius. The work was not personal genius. The work was a paid professional, in a chair, in an office, helping me do the thing I had not, in my entire previous life, been able to do alone. The professional did not solve me. The professional gave me tools. The tools were the kind of tools you carry around in your back pocket, that, at the moment you most need them, you are able to pull out, without flinching, in front of the person you most want to use them with. I want to tell you a tool. The tool is this: when the small voice inside me, the 11-year-old's voice, the one that has been in there since my father walked out, starts to act up. When the small voice tells me to leave, or to defend myself, or to make a joke, or to get angry, or to do any of the moves the small voice has been making my whole life. I now, before doing anything else, take a breath. The breath is the tool. The breath gives me, between the small voice and the next move, about 3 seconds. The 3 seconds are enough. The 3 seconds let the bigger voice, the husband voice, the father voice, the man I have decided to be voice, get into the room. The bigger voice usually says something else. The bigger voice usually says, sit down, listen, let her finish, let him finish, be the man. The bigger voice has, in the years since the album, become louder. The small voice has not gone away. I do not believe it ever will. I do not, in fact, want it to go away, because the small voice is the voice that knows how I got here. And the small voice has, in some rooms, been the voice that kept me alive. What I have learned in the work is to let the bigger voice be the one that speaks. The bigger voice is the one that walked into the kitchen in the hotel suite in Europe in 2018 and asked my wife if she trusted me. The bigger voice is the one that, on the Tuesday, she said she was starting to, did not push her for more than she had given. The bigger voice is the one that, on the morning of every recording session of every album I have made since 444, has asked me, before I go in, whether the song I am about to make is going to be a song my wife and my daughter will be proud to have on a record with my name on it. The bigger voice has, every time, told me which songs to keep and which to throw out. I have thrown out a lot. I want to put that on the page also because most of the rappers in my generation do not, in print, talk about throwing songs out. I have thrown out a lot of songs in the years since 444. The songs I have thrown out were the songs the 11-year-old's voice wanted to make. The songs I have kept are the songs the bigger voice wanted to make. The bigger voice is the husband voice. The husband voice is the father voice. The father voice, in the language of one of my own lyrics, is the voice that took my child to be born to teach me. I am still being taught. I want to end this chapter with one sentence, because the sentence is the only sentence in this chapter that matters, and I do not want it lost in any of the rest of what I have written. I am the man my wife, in the kitchen on that European tour stop in 2018, said she was starting to trust. I have, in the 8.5 years since, been working to be the man her trust deserves. I am still working. I will be working until I die. That is the marriage. Part 5. Staying. Chapter 19. Beyoncé, Rumi, and Sir. The twins came on the 13th of June, 2017. I want to tell you in this chapter what the twins were, because the twins are the second half of the answer to a question my husband asked in the song 444 that I never got to fully answer in public. The question was, in his lyric, about the children we had not been able to keep before Blue Ivy. The lyric was, in the song, his apology for the way his absence had affected what my body had been able to do. I am, in this book, not going to relitigate the lyric. The lyric is on the public record. The lyric is mine to read, but not mine to take back. And I am, in 2026, 8.5 years on, decided enough about the lyric to leave the lyric where it is. What I want to tell you is the part of the answer the song did not include. The part of the answer the song did not include was Rumi and Sir. Rumi was named for the Persian poet Jalal ad-Din Muhammad Rumi, who lived in the 13th century and who has been, for both my husband and me since the early years of our marriage. One of the writers we read in the rooms we did not perform our love in. Rumi the poet wrote, 800 years ago, lines that the two of us were quoting to each other on phone calls in the early 2000s, and that we have, over the years, returned to in moments the public did not see. We named our daughter Rumi. Sir was named the way Sir was named because, my husband says, he came out of me like a man who already had the title. I want you to picture my husband in the delivery room saying that sentence, with our newborn son on his chest, with my body in the recovery from the kind of pregnancy I had had, with the doctors and the nurses around us, with the morning of June the 13th doing the thing the morning does in a hospital. Picture him saying it. He was not joking. He was, in the deep way, observing. The boy had come out in some quiet way, already named. I want to tell you about the pregnancy itself only briefly, because the pregnancy was hard, and the pregnancy is, as they say, the kind of thing the body keeps. The body keeps it. The pregnancy involved toxemia. The pregnancy involved bed rest. The pregnancy involved an emergency that ended with both of my children alive, and the mother alive, and the husband alive, and which, in a different version of any of those 3 lives, might have ended with one less of us in the room. We did not lose anybody. I want to put that on the page. We did not lose anybody. The grace of that morning has not, in 8.5 years, left me. It will not leave me. It has, in fact, become one of the small, private, spiritual undergirdings of the rest of my life. I am, on the morning of every June the 13th, in some kitchen in some house, at some hour, by myself, before the twins are awake, reminded. The twins are now 9. They are, as of the year I am writing this, 8 years and 10 months into being the people they have already started to be. They are, in this kitchen, upstairs, doing what 9-year-olds do. They will in 5 years be teenagers. They will in 10 years be grown. I want them to read this book one day when they are old enough, and I want them to find, on the page about their birth, the sentence that I am going to put on the page right now, so that, when they find it, it will already be on the page, and they will not have to wonder whether I felt it. The sentence is, "You were the part of the answer that the song did not include. You arrived. You came home. You are mine. You are his. You are ours." There is no part of the love story of our marriage that does not, in 2026, include you. Chapter 20, Jay-Z, On the Run. I want to tell you about the tour. The tour was called On the Run 2. The tour was the second iteration of a tour we had done 4 years earlier, in 2014, when the marriage had been in the middle of the period of work that would, 2 years later, become the public version on Lemonade. We had done the first On the Run, partly to be on the road together, in the same buses and the same hotels and the same cities, in a season of the marriage when being on the road together was, in the small interior way, a way to stay in the same room. The first On the Run was a survival tour. The second On the Run, in 2018, was a different kind of tour. The second On the Run was, in my own private internal accounting, the most public testament we have ever made together to the work. The Lemonade album had been hers. The 444 album had been mine. The On the Run 2 tour was both. The tour visuals included home movie footage. The tour visuals included our wedding video. The tour visuals included photographs of our children that the public had not previously seen. The tour visuals included, on certain nights, in certain cities, on a screen above the stage, the words, "I love you," with no qualifiers, with no irony, in plain typography, in front of 50,000 people in a stadium. I want you to picture me on a stage standing next to my wife, who is in some piece of stage clothing her mother had a hand in, who is smiling because the song requires her to smile, but whose smile, by then, was the smile of a woman whose body was, on every Tuesday after the apology, still in the small, slow process of starting to trust me again. Picture me looking at her. Picture her looking at me. Picture both of us in the architecture we had built, the stage, the lights, the dancers, the band, the 50,000 people, doing in public in a way that the rest of the world could see. The small private thing we had been doing in our own kitchen for 2 years already. We had been choosing each other on Tuesdays. The tour was the public version of the choosing. I want to tell you the moment of the tour I have not, in any interview since 2018, told before. The moment was in a city I am not going to name, in a stadium I am not going to name, on a song I will name, which was Forever Young, which is the song I have on every tour, performed last. The song was the encore. The song was the wind down. The song was the kind of song where the lights go softer and the audience starts swaying with their phones up. And I have, for years, used the song to give a small thank you to whichever city we were in. That night, the song was different. That night, in the middle of the song, my wife came back out on the stage. She had not been scheduled to come back out. She had come back out anyway. She walked up to me. She put her hand in my hand. She walked the rest of the song with me, on the stage, in front of 50,000 people, holding my hand, with no choreography, with no microphones, with nothing in her face that was for the audience, and everything in her face that was for me. I sang the rest of the song. The audience saw what they saw. The audience clapped at the end. The lights came down. The dancers came back out. The encore wrapped. What the audience had seen, the audience would have said, was a sweet moment. What had actually happened between us on the stage was the public version of the kitchen moment in the hotel suite in Europe a few weeks earlier. She had said, in the kitchen, that she was starting to trust me. She had said, on the stage in the city I am not going to name, in front of 50,000 people, the same sentence again, in a different language. The language was her hand in my hand for the duration of Forever Young. The marriage was, that night, in the public way, ratified. The marriage had already been ratified, in the private way, in the kitchen. I have, in the years since, played thousands of songs on thousands of stages. I have not, on any other stage, had my wife come out unscheduled to put her hand in mine for the duration of a song. I do not need her to do it again. She did it once. Once was enough. Chapter 21. Beyoncé. Everything is Love. We made the album in 3 weeks. I want to tell you that fast, because the album was a fast album, and a fast album is rare for either of us. We had been working on songs together separately for years. We had not, in any prior decade, made a joint album. The making of a joint album had been, for many years, one of the small private agreements we had between us, which was that we were not going to do the obvious thing the world expected of us, which was to release a Beyoncé and Jay-Z album. We were going to keep our work separate. We were going to keep our work separate. because separate was the way we had built the foundation. Separate was the way the friendship had started, on phone calls, on 2 different stages, in 2 different cities. Separate was the way the marriage had started, with each of us coming into it as a complete artist with a complete life. Separate had, for 16 years of marriage by the summer of 2018, been the rule. The summer of 2018 was the exception to the rule. We were by then in the rhythm of the On the Run 2 tour. We were on a bus. We were in stadiums. We were, every night, in the same building, in front of the same 50,000 people, doing some version of the song we had been singing in some version since 2003. We had been between cities, in the studio. We had had, at some point in the early summer, an offhand conversation about whether the songs we had been making between cities were making themselves into something. We agreed they were. We agreed, on the bus, on a Tuesday, that we would put them out. We agreed not to call it a Beyoncé and Jay-Z album. We agreed to call it The Carters. We agreed to release it as a surprise. We released it in June. We dropped it after a show in London. The album was called Everything Is Love. I want to tell you why the album was called what it was called. The album was called Everything Is Love because by the summer of 2018 we had walked, separately and together, through the worst chapter of our marriage. We had walked through Lemonade. We had walked through 444. We had walked through On the Run 2. We had walked through the kitchens and the hotel suites and the airports and the studios and the living rooms and the therapy offices and the schools where we were dropping our daughter off and the parks where we were taking the twins. We had walked through all of it. We had not, in any of it, walked away. The walking through was the love. The album took its title from the walking through. The album opened with a song called Summer, which is a soft love song. The album included a song called A Peste, which is an aggressive song that we filmed in the Louvre in front of the Mona Lisa, which I have, in the years since, sometimes been asked to explain. I will, in this book, give you the explanation. We filmed in the Louvre because the Louvre, like all the great Western museums, had not, for a long time, been built with us in mind. We took the daughter and the family and the staff, and we put a song on top of one of the most photographed pieces of art in the world, and we were the new picture in front of the old one. The album included a song called 713, which is the area code for Houston, where I am from. The album included a song called Nice, in which my husband, in his verse, calls me, with a small smile in his voice, the goat. The album closed, near the end, with a song called Love Happy, in which I sing, with him on the chorus, we came, we saw, we conquered it all, we came, we conquered, now we're happy in love. That is, as far as I have ever been able to put it, the last sentence of the hard years. We came, we conquered, now we're happy in love. I want you to read that line twice. We came, we conquered, now we're happy in love. The line is past tense. The line is the line a couple says in their own kitchen after a chapter of their marriage that has been the hardest chapter yet. The line is the line you say once you can. The line is not a brag. The line is a report. We released the report in June of 2018. The album spoke for us in a way the years before that had not, in any single piece of work, spoken for both of us at once. We have not, since then, made another joint album. We have not needed to. The job of the joint album was done. The marriage, after the joint album, became something we did, in private, On Tuesdays, without needing to put it in front of an audience to certify it. The audience already knew. The marriage was the marriage. Chapter 22, Jay-Z, Blue Ivy, The Observer. I want to tell you about my oldest daughter. She is, in the year I am writing this book, 14 years old. She has by now lived through more chapters of our public lives than the public has lived through, because she has been, the entire time, on the inside of them. She was 4 when Lemonade dropped. She was 5 when 444 dropped. She was 6 when On the Run 2 dropped. She was 12 when she joined her mother on stage during the Renaissance tour and danced as a backup dancer. She was 13 when she appeared, with our family, in a Tiffany campaign that was less about Tiffany than it was about a particular kind of Black American family portrait the country had not, in its commercial advertising, often allowed. She has been watching us our entire marriage. I want to tell you what she observed, because in the years since the hard years, I have, on several quiet Saturday afternoons, in our kitchen, asked my daughter, the way a father asks a daughter when he wants to know what she thinks, what she remembers from the years she was small. She remembers a lot. She remembers the specific song her mother used to put on in the morning when she was getting her dressed for school, in the years when her mother was carrying the work of the marriage in her own face. She remembers the specific cologne I wear, which she has, since she was 7, been able to identify on me from across a room without looking up from her book. She remembers the way her grandmother Tina would, on certain Saturday mornings in our kitchen, hum a tune Tina's own mother had hummed in Texas. And the tune, my daughter has told me, has now lived in 3 generations of women on her mother's side. And my daughter, as the 3rd, is the one who is going to have to choose whether she carries it forward. She also remembers the year. She does not say the year by name. She says it by feeling. She says, "You and Mommy were quiet that year." She says, "I knew something was wrong, but you both were nice." She says, "I would walk into rooms and the air would be different." She says, "You would sit in the kitchen at night after I went to bed, and I would sneak halfway down the stairs, and I would listen. Even though I could not understand what you were saying, I want you to hold what she said." She had been listening. I am, by 2026, the father of 3. The other 2 were too small for the year of Lemonade and 444 to register in the way it registered for our oldest. Our oldest was the witness. Our oldest had front row seats to the worst chapter of her parents' marriage. Our oldest, by the time she was 9, had seen and metabolized more of the marriage than most adults of her parents' generation had done about their own. She has, in the years since, used what she saw. She has in particular used what she saw to pay attention to her parents, the way a small adult pays attention to other small adults. She has, on certain Saturday mornings, in our kitchen, asked me how I am, in a voice that has nothing to do with the voice of a 14-year-old girl asking her father how he is. She has, on certain Saturday mornings, in our kitchen, said something to her mother, in passing, that has caused her mother to stop, put down whatever was in her hand, walk over, and put her hand on the back of our daughter's head. She has, on certain Saturday mornings in our kitchen, watched my wife and me have a small disagreement, and then put her hand, calmly, on my arm and say, "Daddy, breathe." I want you to read that last sentence twice. She, at 14, told me to breathe. She told me to breathe with the same voice my therapist has been using on me for 9 years. She told me to breathe in the same kitchen where, on a Tuesday in the early winter of 2008, I had been the smaller version of myself for the first time in our marriage and had walked back from it. I had taught her to breathe by being the man who had learned to breathe. She had been watching the entire time. I want, in this chapter, to apologize to her in print, because I have not, in any other public document, said this part to her directly. I am sorry, oldest daughter, that the year you remember as the quiet year was a year I made hard. I am sorry. I am still sorry. I am going to be sorry. I am also, by now, the man who is sorry, which is not the same man as the man who did the harm. I want you to know the difference. The difference is the rest of my fatherhood. She read this paragraph 3 drafts ago. She is the only one outside our editorial team who has been allowed to read the manuscript before it goes to print, because she is the only one who has earned that right. She approved the paragraph. She made one small note. The note was, "Dad, you forgot to say the part where Mom forgave you." I am, on her note, putting that part on the page now. Her mother forgave me. Her mother forgave me Tuesday by Tuesday, year by year, kitchen by kitchen, hotel suite by hotel suite, song by song, album by album, tour by tour. Her mother forgave me on her own pace, which was the right pace, and which I did not push. Her mother forgave me without making a public production of the forgiveness, because the forgiveness was not for the public. The forgiveness was for our family. Our daughter at 14 witnessed the forgiveness. Our daughter at 14 has, in this book, made me put it on the page. I am grateful to her. I am grateful, in fact, beyond what this paragraph can carry. Chapter 23. Beyoncé, the Legacy. I want to tell you what I think about in 2026 when I think about our marriage as a piece of work. I think about Black women. I want to be specific. I think about the Black women who watched the album in 2016, and for some of them, used it as a piece of evidence that they were not crazy in their own marriages. I think about the Black women who watched 444 in 2017 and saw, for some of them for the first time in a public Black man's record, an apology that was not a Hallmark apology. I think about the Black women who came up to me in airports, in restaurants, in hotel lobbies, in the years after the albums, and told me that the records had been, in their own marriages, the soundtrack to a difficult Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table that had ended with their husband on the other side of the table also crying. I think about Black men. I think about the Black men in the audience of 444 who, during certain songs, in certain cities, at certain stops on the tour, were the loudest part of the audience. They were not the demographic the marketing department had predicted. They were the men who had been waiting for many years for a Black male public figure to put on a record what had been, in their own homes, a sentence they had not yet figured out how to say to their wives. They sang along. Some of them cried. I think about our daughter. I think about my own mother. I think about my husband's mother. I think about the long line of Black couples in the American story, going back, who have, in private, made marriages that did not get a public record because the public was not, in their lifetimes, interested in writing one. I think about my Aunt Jean, who is a Houston woman, who, in 1968, married a man whose name nobody outside Texas has ever heard and is going to celebrate, in 2026, 58 years of marriage. I think about the wedding she had, which was a small one. I think about the children she raised, which were many, on a salary that was small. I think about the kitchen she has, which is small, and the marriage she has, which is large. I want our marriage, in the long run, to belong to her. I want it to belong to her, not because she needs it, but because we needed her. We came, my husband and I, into our own marriage with 20 years of public work behind us and the eyes of the world on us. We had the kind of resources Aunt Jean and her husband had not had. We did not invent any of what we have. We borrowed it. We borrowed it from the Aunt Jeans of every black neighborhood in the country. We borrowed it from the Tina Knowles and the Gloria Carters who had, before us, in apartments and in houses and on porches, done the small daily work of staying. The marriage is borrowed. I want to put that on the page. The marriage is borrowed. The marriage was not, by the time it got to us, a new invention. The marriage was a thing the women who came before us had been quietly, in private, in apartments the public never saw, building, brick by brick, since long before either of us was born. We inherited the architecture. We did not invent it. We are, in the public way, just one of the houses on the street. The other houses on the street are also still standing. The other houses on the street are the legacy. When my own daughter is 58 years into her own marriage, in the year 2079, with whatever person she has chosen, in whatever house she will be in, with whatever children and grandchildren she will have, in whatever kitchen will be hers, I want her to be able, on a Sunday afternoon, to put her hand on her own kitchen counter, look at her partner, and know that she is just one of the houses on the street. The street is the inheritance. I want our marriage, in the end, to be just another house on the street. Chapter 24, Jay-Z, The Long Marriage. I want to use the last chapter of the book to say something I have not, in any prior interview, said as cleanly as I am about to say it. A long marriage is the only luxury I have ever cared about. I want you to hold that. I have, by my own count, been a millionaire for 30 years. I have, in those 30 years, been able to buy most of what a man can buy. I have been to the rooms. I have been on the boats. I have been in the front seats. I have been in the back seats. I have signed the deals. I have done the things a Brooklyn boy who came out of the Marcy houses spends his entire life imagining he might one day get to do. None of those things have, in the end, mattered the way I expected them to matter. The thing that has mattered, the thing that has held its weight, the thing that has, on the Tuesday of any given week, in any given year, in any given decade, been the thing in the room I would not have traded, is the long marriage. The long marriage is the only thing that is not for sale. The long marriage is the only thing the money does not buy. The long marriage is, in fact, the thing the money sometimes makes harder, and which a man with money has to fight for in a way. A man without money has to fight for differently. We have, in the 18 years of our marriage so far, fought for it differently. Sometimes the fight was about money. Sometimes the fight was about time. Sometimes the fight was about which city we were in. Sometimes the fight was about whose work mattered most that month. Sometimes the fight was about something neither of us had words for. And the fight was, in those moments, just the fact of the work. We have done the work. I want you to hold that. We have done the work. The work has been the marriage. The marriage has, in turn, taught me what the work is for. The work is for the morning I just described in chapter 22, in which my 14-year-old daughter put her hand on my arm in our kitchen on a Saturday morning and told me to breathe. The work is for the mornings the twins, who are 9, come into the kitchen at the same time, fighting about something a 9-year-old fights about, and the entire kitchen rearranges itself around them, the way a kitchen does in a house with 3 children. The work is for the day, 20 years from now, that I will not be alive to see, when one of our children in the kitchen of a house I have not yet seen will tell their own child a story about their grandparents that begins with the sentence, "They were friends first on the phone for a year and a half." That is the legacy I am working for. I do not need a statue. I do not need a building with my name on it. I do not need a museum exhibit. I have one of those already, and the museum exhibit, while flattering, does not feed the dog. The dog in our kitchen in 2026 is fed by my wife in the kitchen on Tuesdays. The dog will be fed by our daughter in some other kitchen in some other year on some other Tuesday. The dog has been the same dog for several years. The dog will, by the rules of dogs, eventually be replaced. The replacement dog will also be fed in some kitchen on a Tuesday by some Carter or Knowles-Carter. In a marriage they will, by the time they are old enough to know it, have inherited from the marriage we are still building. I am not done. I am 60 years old. I have been married 18 years. I have 2 girls and a boy. I have, by every reasonable measure, more love than I deserve. I have had more grace than I have earned. I want to use what is left of my life to keep being the man my wife, in the kitchen in the hotel suite in Europe in 2018, said she was starting to trust. I want to use what is left of my life to be the father whose oldest daughter, at 14, in our kitchen on a Saturday morning, can tell to breathe and trust that the breathing will, in fact, happen. I want to use what is left of my life to keep choosing, on Tuesdays, the woman whose name is on the cover of this book with mine. That is the long marriage. That is, in my own internal accounting, the only thing that has ever mattered. Epilogue. Both of us. A house. An evening in 2026. We are back in the kitchen. He is at the stove. I am at the counter. Blue Ivy, who is 14, is on a couch in another room with a book and a pair of headphones. Rumi and Sir, who are 9, are upstairs, where they have been upstairs for most of the time it has taken to tell this story. The dog is in the kitchen. The body of water out the kitchen window is the body of water it is, in the city we are in, on the evening we are in the year we are in. The window is open a few inches. There is a small breeze. There is a small noise from upstairs. There is a small song coming through the speaker, which is one of his songs, on shuffle, which we have not stopped to acknowledge, because the songs are the songs, and we are the people who made them. He says, "B." I say, He says, "Dinner." I say, "Give me 5. He says, "You said 5 10 minutes ago." I laugh. I put the phone down. I come around the counter. I come up behind him at the stove. I put my chin on his shoulder. I look at the box. I say, "We have eaten this exact dinner 40 times this year." He says, "This is 41. I say, "All right." I kiss the back of his neck. This is the same scene I described in the prologue. I want you to read it again with what you now know. The kitchen is the same. The stove is the same. The man is the same. The woman is the same. The chin on the shoulder is the same. The kiss is the same. The 41 is the same. What has changed between the prologue and the epilogue is what you, the reader, are now bringing to the scene. You now know about the phone calls. You know the wedding. You know the orchids. You know the year a man wrote a song at 4:44 in the morning. You now know about the kitchen in the hotel suite in Europe. You now know about the daughter who, at 14, told her father to breathe. You know all of it. The scene has not changed. The reader has changed. That is the only thing this book has been trying to do. We will be in this kitchen, in some house, every evening, for as many evenings as God gives us. The 41 will become 42. The 42 will become 100. The 100 will become 1,000. The 1,000 will become, in the long run, the only number that has ever mattered. Choose each other, even on Tuesday, especially on Tuesday. That is the marriage. That is, in our own internal language, the prayer, a final word. This book is inspired by publicly available material about Beyoncé Giselle Knowles-Carter and Shawn Carter, Jay-Z, the exterior of their lives, the timeline of their meeting, their wedding on April 4th, 2008, the births of Blue Ivy on January 7th, 2012, and the twins Rumi and Sir on June 13th, 2017, the public release of the Lemonade visual album in April 2016, the public release of 444 in June 2017, the joint Carter's album Everything is Love in June 2018, the On the Run and On the Run 2 tours, the Vogue cover essay of September 2018, the New York Times sit-down interview with Dean Baquet in October 2017, is all sourced from on-record interviews, lyrics, public statements, and the artist's own art. The interior of this book, the late-night phone calls of the early 2000s, the morning after the wedding, the early winter Tuesday in the 8th month of marriage, the dressing room at the 2011 VMAs, the hotel suite in Europe in 2018, the Saturday morning in 2026 with Blue Ivy in the kitchen, has been dramatized in the spirit of what they have said, in their own words, in their own art, about their own marriage. No third party has been named or speculated about. No scandal has been invented beyond what has already been put into the public record by the artists themselves. Where the public record was silent, the narrative has been softened, omitted, or generalized. To Beyoncé and to Jay-Z, you have given the rest of us, on purpose and over years, the rare gift of two of the most watched lives on the planet, lived as a marriage rather than as a brand. Thank you. To Blue Ivy, Rumi, and Sir, you got here exactly when you got here, and you are exactly who you are. That is enough. To the listener, thank you for these 2 hours. Until we meet again, I'm Barron Darby. Love boldly, love deeply, and never stop living your story.